back to JW Highlights. And today, my good wife sent me over an article and it blew my mind. I had no idea that the Watchtower was involved in segregation back in the day. And we're going to look at some old Watchtower articles showing just how heavily involved in segregation the Watchtower really was. And when we think of the Watchtower being God's chosen organization, do you think God is a God of segregation? It seems silly now in the year and the time that we live. But for a lot of us, and for a lot of us in some of the nations and countries such as Africa, I think it's vital that they know the history of the Watchtower, the history of Rutherford, and the history of the governing body and what's behind the governing body's thinking and where all of this thinking came from. So we're going to take a quick look at this. First of all, when we think of racial segregation in the United States, on July 26th, 1948, President Harry S. Truman signed Executive Order 9981, ending segregation in the United States Armed Forces. And that's where it started. 1948 was to bring an end. So it didn't happen just instantly. In 1954, which is 6 years later, segregation of public schools, state-sponsored, was declared unconstitutional by the U.S. Supreme Court in a landmark case, Brown versus Topeka. Now, how long did segregation last here in Canada, here where I live? Well, it says it lasted here until 1965. Racial segregation in schools, stores, and most aspects of public life existed legally in Ontario, Quebec, and Nova Scotia, and informally in other provinces such as British Columbia. Now, I was born in 1963. Of course, I was young, but all of my life, and I lived in Alberta, Western Canada, I never knew segregation. I never knew anything about it. All people were equal. That's how my parents taught me. People are people, people are people of God, and segregation didn't exist in my life. Now, this is just before my life. It was coming to an end. But we often wonder, what did the Watchtower do? What was Rutherford's thinking? What was Nor's thinking? What was Russell's thinking on segregation? Did they actually believe that they were supreme, that they were superior because of the color of their skin? It's a good question. Now, we're going to look at some of the articles that they wrote, because Russell and Rutherford wrote their own articles. So, first of all, we're going to look at a few pictures of segregation. Here's a guy waiting at a waiting room. This is real. We think this is just crazy. And we look at some of the pictures of segregation on the internet. They had a sink for white people and a sink for colored people. And that's how they did it. They had separate places where they lived. So segregation was a big thing. They had arrows pointing where colored people should go and things like that. Waiting room for colored only by order. So this is how serious it was. It was really a really unfair system. And then Martin Luther King came in and he did a huge amount of work to change things as well. And Martin Luther King, he came out and he protested, just like what's happening here with what we're doing with Be Free 2023. And it's in the bottom description here. There's a protest going on at the White House, October 31st, 2023. And it's put on by ex-Jehovah's Witnesses because they're tired of all of the abuses happening within this religion. And so that protest is going on. Now, we're going to look at some of the governing body. If you look here, there's one fella here, Samuel Hurd, who's colored, so to speak, but he's not colored. He's not from Africa. There's no colored people in the governing body to say, some of them have good tans and stuff, but there's no black people. And this would show that they're diversified. I'm going through all the pictures. Yeah. You'd think maybe they would have 3 or 4 black people on there, but no, it's all white, all white people running the governing body over the years. We're just going through pictures. There's a big picture of all of the governing bodies, and there's one black guy on there. And here it is again. So the governing body is not a governing body of color. You would think they would have Mexicans and people from Africa on this governing body, people from all over the world, perhaps, on a governing body that would be fair, and people from different races. But these people are all hand selected, it seems like, from the US and area. But you would think a Supreme Council would be from all over the world. But that's not the way it works within the Jehovah's Witness religion. So we're going to go to Twitter, and my good wife was following Larchwood. Now, some of you may have heard of Larchwood. He's doing the same thing that we're doing, but he's on Twitter doing it. And he brings up some very good points on this. Now, Larchwood says, remember when being colored was a result of sin, and there was hope that colored brethren would be restored to the grand original standard of perfection. Can you imagine that? This is Russell. This is how Russell's mindset was, is that in the new system, it would be all white people. That was Russell's. Now, you might not believe it. I didn't believe it until you start reading the Watchtower. So you can pull it up. And here he says, and you guys can go to this yourselves if you want to go into the archives of Watchtowers. And here it is. We reminded one dear sister that the Lord enjoys humility and ensures us unless we humble ourselves, we shall not be exalted. If nature favors the colored brethren and sisters in the exercise of humility, it is that much to their advantage. So here they are segregating and bringing out that these colored brethrens, they better humble themselves. That's what Russell's saying. And then he goes on to say here, a little while, and those who shall have been faithful to their covenant of sacrifice will be granted new bodies, spiritual bodies beyond the veil, where color and sex distinctions will be no more. A little while, and the millennium kingdom will be inaugurated, which will bring restitution to all mankind, restitution to the perfection of mind and body, feature, and color, to the grand original standard, which God declared very good. And that was lost for time. So here they're bringing out that God has a perfect color for his race of people. And what is that color? Well, Russell wasn't dark. Russell was white. So let's go on and see what else these guys are saying. So that was Russell, April 1st, 1914, Watchtower. So go to your archives, read it for yourselves. Larchwood was kind enough to bring this up for us. Now, we're going to talk about the regulations in Canada here in a bit, but let's go on to this article. Now, this article, I just want to go back. This was 1924. So this is from December 1st, 1924, Watchtower. Now, Russell had died 1916, and now Rutherford is the new president running the Watchtower. And by the way, pretty much all of the rules in the Watchtower were carried forth from Rutherford. It's really a Rutherford religion, because Rutherford banned the beards. He was very much a white supremacist. He wanted no beards, and he banned all of Russell's books eventually, and they all had beards, and they became Bible students. So there was quite a separation within the Watchtower when Russell died. And Rutherford was even more so what would you call it? Rutherford was like a Hitler in the Jehovah's Witness religion. And I hate to use that word, but that's what he was. And you can see it on any of the thumbnails, and that's how he was. So here's Rutherford's words. He says, "The Lord has wonderfully blessed the work among the colored brethren during the year, providing that it was pleasing to him to have a separate department for the colored people of the United States." So here they made a separate department for the colored people. "The manager of the colored work, together with his associates, has zealously pressed on, and the Lord's blessing upon them has been marked." So here's Rutherford's words. This is Rutherford. I couldn't believe this when I read it. And then we go back here to 1957 in the Kingdom Ministry. And you see, by 1957, this should have all been done. They already passed laws in the US, 1954, when they were no longer to make distinctions within colored people within schools. But here in 1957, that's 3 years later, the poor Black brothers and sisters within the Jehovah's Witness religion were still being segregated. So here's the Kingdom Ministry serving where the need is great. And you see the congregations are all colored, East Unit colored. And then over here, this colored is colored. And here's another one, the South Unit is colored. You see, so that's their Kingdom Ministry. They're showing colored congregations. Can you imagine? Like I couldn't imagine this, and this blew me away when I read this stuff. Really blew me away. Now, December 15th, 1921. I think we read this one. We'll look at this. It's kind of small writing here, so it says colored branch. The work among the colored brothers has been continually on the increase in the United States. So here's a little article about the colored brothers. And he says, after prayerful consideration and consultation with a number of the colored brethren, a 4-day convention was recently held in New York, at which time it was determined to organize a colored branch of the society. They had a separate assembly just for colored people. Some of the colored brethren have had the thought that this was segregation of the colored friends, but this is entirely a wrong idea. There is no segregation about it. So here, Rutherford saying, yeah, or Nor. This is probably Nor by this time. What year was this? I want to look at the year. Sorry, 1921. So that's Rutherford. So Rutherford says, well, there's no segregation, and let's see if I can blow this up. I don't think I can. Okay, so some of the colored brethren had the thought that this was segregation. Russell said no, or Rutherford said no, that's the wrong idea. This is not segregation, but all you Black brothers and sisters, you can go and have a separate assembly. Can you believe that? It has been found that the organization of the work under various branches has received the greatest blessings of the Lord, and we have no doubt that his blessing will be manifest, particularly on the colored work henceforth. Can you believe this? In a Watchtower, December 15th, 1921. So then it talks about the regular pilgrimage service inaugurated to public meetings and so on and so forth. And then it goes to say the colored friends will find it much more advantageous to organize separate classes and not to meet with their white brothers, but devote their energies and services amongst the people of their own color. But it's not segregation. It's not segregation. Can you believe this? Can you believe this is the mindset of the founder of the Watchtower? Rutherford. Both guys, Russell and Rutherford, both guys. So let's carry on. Then he says, therefore, we strongly urge the colored brethren in every part of the land to organize separate classes and carry on a separate public witness. All contributions to the work of the society may be sent separately to the colored branch, made payable, of course, to the society, not the colored branches. They don't get the money, but it can be made to the colored branch, and then the colored branch has to send all of the money over to the Watchtower. That's how they set it up. All contributions will go to the society. Then it says all communications should be addressed as follow: Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, colored branch. So we talk about segregation. Here it is. Here's the segregation of the Watchtower. This is how they started. Both Russell and Rutherford. You just can't believe this stuff. So I think that's it on segregation. Now, this did affect us here in Canada, and in Canada, here's what's interesting: regulations of religious content on the Canadian radio was brought about because Jehovah's Witnesses, then known as the Bible Students, allowed the KKK airtime on their radio station in the 1920s. And that was out of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, where this radio station was. And the Watchtower was using this radio station to broadcast. Remember back in the day, Rutherford was big on radio. They had radio stations, and they were using this radio station in Canada to advertise the KKK. They thought this was great. And I know in Alberta, in central Alberta, there is groups of KKK. So now it's interesting history. Now then it goes on to talk about this Saskatoon station, Chuck, owned by the Jehovah's Witnesses, allowed J.J. Maloney, Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, to make an on-air speech that was pretty much the end of Canada's era of free market radio. So what can we expect from an online regulator? Lessons from religion. There's little doubt that the CRTC, that's the regulator in Canada for radio, will soon be asked by cable and satellite providers to recapture some lost loot once new legislation is in. So, good article. This is what's happening. This is what has happened in Canada. And now there's regulations on the radio airwaves so that this can't happen again, all because of Jehovah's Witnesses and getting in bed with the Ku Klux Klan. So, this is real, folks. I was knocked off my feet. I thought I knew everything as an activist on this side of the fence, but thanks to Larchwood and a lot of others out there, we keep getting more information about how the history of this organization began. So there you have the rest of the story. Folks, that's all I have to say about segregation within the Jehovah's Witness organization. It was a thing of the past, and it still is happening today, and I will attest to that. And thank you again. Keep living your life with love, and you will reap all the benefits that you get back from loving all people of all nationalities, because we're all the same at the end of the day in God's eyes. Thanks again. Bye for now.